A block can feel like an ocean in Detroit at 2 in the morning. Streetlights shimmer on wet asphalt. A stray dog trots past a burned-out porch. Somewhere, a factory siren that hasn't mattered in years still groans like it remembers power. And in the middle of that empty, echoing city, a man sits in the driver's seat of a parked Oldsmobile, engine off, collar up, hands on the wheel like he's trying to keep himself from shaking apart. He's waiting on a signal. Not a call. Not a knock. A flicker in a third-floor window across the street. When it finally comes, one blink of light, then darkness, the man exhales, looks down at the passenger seat, and touches a small object he's been holding for so long it's warmed to his palm. A key. Plain brass. Worn teeth. The kind of key you don't think about until it's gone. He whispers one name into the glass. Not a prayer, not a threat, a promise. Then he opens the car door and steps into the night that's about to erase 9 men from the city's story. Because this is what betrayal does when it lands in the wrong family. It doesn't just break trust. It reorganizes a life. It turns love into a ledger. It turns patience into a clock. And in 1987, in Detroit, where the lights were dimmer than they used to be, and the streets carried the weight of too many closed gates, the Williams family decided that betrayal was not something you survived. It was something you answered. Quietly. Relentlessly. In a sequence that made the city feel like it was holding its breath, this is the Detroit vengeance of 1987, the Williams family who hunted 9 men after a betrayal. And it begins the way most real disasters begin, not with violence, with a favor. Detroit, 1987, a city of echoes and edges. Detroit in the late 80s wasn't the cartoon some outsiders carry in their heads. It wasn't just ruins and crime tape and headlines. It was still people, working, hoping, improvising. It was mothers sweeping stoops that led to cracked sidewalks. It was men playing cards in basements lit by one bare bulb. It was teenagers learning to laugh too loud so fear didn't show. But you could feel the city's history everywhere. In the big brick factories that sat silent like sleeping giants. In the chain-link fences wrapped in wind-blown plastic. In the way certain streets felt hollow, as if the city had been gently scooped out and left to air dry. In neighborhoods like the one the Williams family called home, survival had its own etiquette. Don't stare too long. Don't ask who someone is related to. Don't repeat things you hear through thin walls, and don't confuse politeness for softness. Detroit didn't reward naivete. It didn't always reward honesty either. What it rewarded, what it respected, was consistency. People who did what they said. People who paid back favors. People who didn't flinch when life leaned hard on them. The Williams family had that kind of reputation. Not famous, not flashy, just steady. The kind of family neighbors trusted with spare keys and emergency babysitting. The kind of family whose name, when spoken, made people nod as if they'd just been reminded of something reliable. But steady doesn't mean harmless. Steady means you don't see the shift until it's already happened. And in early 1987, the Williams family shifted. The Williams family. Warmth, pride, and one unforgivable line. The Williams lived in a 2-story house that had good bones and tired paint. The front steps sagged slightly in the middle where 1,000 feet had climbed them. The living room had worn carpet and a couch that held the shape of every argument and every laugh the family had ever had. A framed photograph sat on the mantel. A wedding picture, smiling faces, a promise captured in flashbulb light. And in the kitchen, always the kitchen, there was a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, food on the stove, voices overlapping. At the center was the mother, Denise Williams, whose hands were always doing something useful, folding, stirring, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping down. Not nervous, just active. like she'd learned long ago that motion kept the world from tipping. Her husband, Leon, carried a quieter strength. He had the posture of a man who'd been told no by life enough times that he stopped believing in easy luck. He worked when work was available, fixed things when they broke, and spoke only when he meant it. They had 2 sons. Marcus, the older, had the kind of calm that made people relax around him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't quick to anger. He listened first, which in a city built on noise was its own kind of authority. Marcus had friends, connections, a way of moving through Detroit that suggested he understood the city's patterns. Ray, the younger, carried more heat. Not reckless, just intense. He took things personally. He remembered every slight. He loved his family so hard it sometimes looked like anger from the outside. Together, Marcus and Ray were a balance, order and fire. And as long as the family's boundaries were respected, that balance stayed stable. The problem in 1987 was that someone crossed a line the Williams family didn't advertise, a line that wasn't written down, a line that didn't come with warnings, a line you only discovered after you'd stepped over it. Because the betrayal wasn't a fist fight on a corner. It wasn't an insult in a bar. It was something quieter, and therefore crueler. It was an inside act, a key given in trust, a door opened from within, a life rearranged overnight. The favor that became a wound. It began with a man named Calvin "Cal" Booker. Cal wasn't blood, but he'd been close enough to feel like it in the way neighborhoods sometimes adopt people into families. He'd grown up nearby. He'd eaten at the Williams kitchen table. He'd sat on their porch and laughed at old stories like he belonged in them. Cal had charisma, easy smile, quick talk, that talent for making people feel like the world was lighter when he walked into a room. But charisma can be a mask as much as it's a gift. In January of 1987, Cal came to Marcus with a problem. Not a dramatic problem, not a crisis with sirens, a quiet problem that needed a quiet favor. "I need somewhere to hold something for a couple days," Cal said. Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded. "Hold what?" Cal smiled like it wasn't serious. "Nothing crazy, just something I don't want at my place." Leon was in the room, reading the newspaper, not looking up. Denise was rinsing dishes, listening the way mothers listen without seeming to. Ray was nearby, pretending not to care, but watching Cal's hands. Marcus didn't like vague favors. "Vague favors have sharp endings," he said. "If it's trouble, it's not coming in here." Cal's smile softened, almost hurt. "It's not trouble, man. It's insurance. I just need it somewhere safe." Safe. That word can be dangerous, because everyone wants safe, and everyone is willing to stretch the meaning of safe when they're scared. Marcus looked at his father. Leon's eyes lifted from the paper, met Marcus's, then dropped again. Not permission, not refusal, just the tired understanding of a man who knew that in Detroit, people were always asking you to carry their weight. Denise set a plate in the rack. Voice gentle. 2 days, she said. That's it. Cal nodded fast. 2 days. Marcus agreed against his better instincts, because Cal had been around too long to suddenly treat like a stranger. Because family, chosen or born, feels like something you protect. Cal brought a duffel bag that night. Heavy. Not so heavy it couldn't be carried, but heavy enough that Ray's eyes narrowed. Cal set it in the back room and zipped it open just enough to show. Not money, not weapons, not anything dramatic. Just a stack of sealed envelopes, bundled neat. Paper, Cal said. That's it. Paper can ruin you faster than bullets if it's the wrong paper. Marcus stared at the envelopes. What is it? Cal's smile didn't reach his eyes. Business. Marcus didn't press further. That's the first mistake in most betrayal stories. You don't press further because you don't want to feel rude. You don't press further because you want to believe trust still means something. 2 days passed. Then 3. Then 4. Cal didn't come back. When Marcus called, there was no answer. When Ray drove by Cal's building, Cal's car was gone. That's when Denise started moving differently in the kitchen, wiping counters harder, stirring pots longer, as if she could scrub off the feeling that something had been left inside their house that didn't belong. Leon said, "Low. Get it out." Marcus agreed. Ray didn't sleep that night, because he knew what left inside the house sometimes really meant. It meant leverage. It meant someone else's problems had been hidden in their walls. And if that problem got discovered by the wrong people, the Williams wouldn't just be collateral, they'd be suspects, or targets, or both. On the 5th day, a stranger knocked on the door. Not a neighbor, not someone from church. A man with a clean jacket and eyes that didn't soften. He smiled politely, but the smile was wrong, like a tool. "Evening," he said. "I'm looking for Calvin Booker." Denise's hand tightened around the edge of the door. "Calvin doesn't live here." The man nodded as if he expected that. "Right. I didn't say he did. I said I'm looking for him." Marcus stepped forward, calm face, controlled voice. "What's this about?" The man's eyes flicked to Marcus, measuring him. "Just business," he said. "He left something where it shouldn't be." Ray appeared behind Marcus like a shadow, jaw tight. The man looked past them into the house, as if imagining the bag. Then he smiled again, still polite. "Tell Calvin," he said, "that the people he's dealing with don't like waiting." He turned to leave, then paused, adding softly, "And they really don't like surprises." Then he walked down the steps and disappeared into the night. Denise closed the door slowly, like slamming it would invite something back in. Leon didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said, "This ain't paper." Marcus swallowed. "No." Ray's voice was quiet and furious. "He set us up." That was the first time anyone said it out loud. Set up. Betrayal with intent. And once you name it, you can't unname it. The air in the house changed. The warmth was still there, technically. Heat working. Stove on. Lamps glowing. But the feeling of home shifted into something narrower. A bunker. A place you defended. A place you didn't trust the walls to protect anymore. Marcus said, "We move it tonight." Leon nodded once. "Now." They went to the back room. Marcus unzipped the bag fully. The envelopes were there, yes. But under them, wrapped in plastic, were other items. Objects that made Ray's stomach drop, and Marcus's blood turn cold. Not described in detail, just enough to understand. This wasn't paperwork. This was a message. A message that belonged to people who expected obedience. And Cal had used the Williams house as a hiding place without telling them what they were holding, either because he didn't care, or because he wanted them implicated, or because he'd already sold their trust to someone else. In that moment, Marcus understood betrayal isn't just someone hurting you, it's someone weaponizing your goodness, using your loyalty as bait. Ray slammed the bag shut. "I'm going to find him." Leon's voice was ice. "You find him," he said. "You find the truth, and then you decide what you can live with." Denise stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes steady. "No," she said. "We decide together." That line, together, would become the Williams family's anchor. Because what came next wasn't one man's revenge. It was a family moving as one organism, driven by the same wound. And wounds don't negotiate. They either heal or they harden into something else. The betrayal reveals its shape. They moved the bag that night, quietly, carefully, with the kind of caution you use when you suspect the air itself might be listening. They didn't call the police. Not because they didn't believe in law, because they understood reality. If you bring certain problems to the wrong desk, you don't get protection. You get attention. And attention can be deadly. The next morning, Marcus started calling around. Not panicked calls, not loud ones. Soft calls, old friends, cousins, a mechanic who knew people, a man who worked security downtown and heard things. The question wasn't, "Where's Cal?" The question was, "Who is he with?" And the answers came back slowly, like reluctant truth. Cal had been seen with men outside his usual circle. Cal had been flashing money. Cal had been talking too big. Cal had been borrowing from one person to pay another. And then the worst detail, Cal had been telling people the Williams family was good for it. Good for it. As if the Williams name was collateral he could hand to strangers, as if Denise's kitchen table was a bank, as if Leon's quiet integrity was currency. Ray heard that phrase and went silent. Not calm silent, dangerous silent. Marcus watched him and said, "Ray." Ray didn't answer. Marcus stepped closer. "Look at me." Ray's eyes lifted. "He used Mom," Ray said, voice low. "He used the house." Leon said nothing, but his hands clenched once, slowly, as if he was resisting an urge to break something just to feel relief. Denise sat at the table, coffee untouched, and said, almost to herself, "9 men." Marcus blinked. "What?" Denise looked up, eyes sharper than anyone expected. 9, she repeated. "That's how many he's been with. That's how many names he's said in passing. I listen. I always listen." The room went still. Because Denise wasn't dramatic. Denise wasn't paranoid. If Denise had counted 9, it meant Cal's betrayal wasn't one mistake. It was a network. 9 men connected to Cal's new life. 9 men who had either benefited from the setup or helped build it. 9 men who now knew the Williams were exposed. And exposure is an invitation. Marcus sat down slowly. Ray stood very still. Leon looked at Denise, and in his eyes was a question and an answer at once. The question, "What do we do?" The answer, "Whatever we must." That was the moment the Williams family crossed a line inside themselves, not into bloodlust, into resolve. Because when betrayal threatens your home, your family, your future, especially when it comes through someone you fed and trusted, your options shrink. You can run, you can beg. You can hope the people circling your life decide not to bite, or you can remove the threat, one by one, before it grows teeth. Marcus didn't announce vengeance. He didn't give speeches. He stood, went to the front window, and watched the street as if seeing it for the first time. Then he said quietly, "We end this." And that was the beginning of the hunt. Not random, not chaotic, a sequence, a clock, 9 men connected to betrayal, and the Williams family moving through Detroit like a shadow with a purpose. Marcus didn't start with the loudest names. He started with the easiest thread to pull, a runner. A man who didn't make decisions, only deliveries, small packages, small messages, small lies carried in his jacket lining. The kind of man who could swear he was just surviving, just doing errands, just keeping his head down. Those men are useful because they connect worlds. They know the doors. They know the stairwells. They know who answers the payphone behind the corner store and who doesn't answer at all. Marcus found him the way Marcus found most things, by watching the routine until it betrayed itself. The runner liked mornings. He liked the false cleanliness of daylight, the sense that trouble slept in. He walked to a diner near a closed plant, ordered the same cheap breakfast, and sat where he could see the door. He thought he was careful. He wasn't careful enough to notice the same car parked 2 blocks away 3 days in a row, or the same figure in a dark coat entering the diner not to eat, but to look. On the 4th morning, the runner stepped outside into a wind that smelled like old smoke and wet metal. A man bumped his shoulder lightly, like an accident. "Sorry," the man said. The runner didn't recognize him, which should have been a warning. But Detroit was full of strangers. The runner kept walking. He made it half a block before he realized his pocket felt wrong. He reached down. His pager was gone. He stopped, breath tight. Because a missing pager isn't just a missing object, it's a missing lifeline. The runner turned in a slow circle, scanning faces, scanning cars, scanning windows. Nobody looked back. And in that absence of reaction, he felt something colder than fear. He felt himself become visible. A voice behind him said his name, not shouted, not dramatic, said like someone reading a label. He froze. Marcus stepped out from between two parked cars, hands open, posture calm. The runner's eyes darted, searching for exits. Marcus didn't block him. Marcus just stood in the only direction that mattered. "You know Calvin Booker," Marcus said. The runner swallowed hard, trying to lie and realizing his voice would betray him. "I don't—" Marcus raised a finger gently, like a teacher stopping a child mid-story. "Don't," he said. "Not today." The runner's mouth closed. Marcus held his gaze. "9 names," Marcus said. "You're going to start with 1. The runner's shoulders sagged slightly, not in surrender but in exhaustion. Because men like him don't die for principles. They die because they pick the wrong people to underestimate. He looked down the street. Then he looked back at Marcus. And he said a name. Not the biggest name, the safest one to offer. But Marcus didn't react with relief. He reacted with precision. Like a man building a map. Ray watched from farther down the block, jaw clenched, hands tucked in his coat pockets as if he was physically restraining himself from rushing the moment. Denise's voice echoed in Marcus's mind. Together. So Marcus didn't let Ray burn the city. Marcus just took the name and let the runner walk away, shaking, with the feeling of a missing pager still haunting his pocket. That was how the Williams hunted. Not with chaos, with pressure, with understanding, with the kind of restraint that makes fear last longer. The runner made it home that night. But he didn't sleep. Because once you give a name to the wrong people, you spend the rest of the night listening for footsteps that aren't there yet. And in Detroit, listening can feel like waiting for judgment. The name the runner gave them belonged to a man who liked being called Duke. Not his real name. A street name that sounded like authority. Duke wasn't a boss. He was an organizer. He didn't pull triggers. He pulled people. He knew who owed who. He knew which crew was short on cash. He knew which bar was safe for meetings, and which one was a trap. If Calvin Booker had been the smiling door to betrayal, Duke was the hallway behind it, and hallways lead deeper. Marcus wrote Duke's name down on a piece of paper he kept folded in his wallet. He didn't show it to anyone. He didn't say it out loud like a vow. He just held it for a moment, then folded it again. 1. 9 became 8, not by optimism, by intention. Because once you decide you're ending something, you don't count the days, you count the obstacles. And the Williams had 8 obstacles left. The city starts. Whispering Detroit didn't know the Williams family had begun. Not yet, but the city felt shifts before it understood them. A meeting that didn't happen. A car that stopped showing up on its usual block. A man who used to talk too loud suddenly speaking in short sentences, eyes darting. Whispers moved through barbershops and laundromats and church parking lots. Something is happening. Not a war, not a random spree. Something targeted, something quiet. And when something is quiet, people fear it more. Because loud violence has rules, quiet violence has intention. Duke felt it first. He didn't have proof. But he had instincts sharpened by years of watching men disappear for reasons they never wrote down. So he changed routine. He stopped using his favorite payphone. He stopped sitting by windows. He moved meetings earlier. He kept one man near him always, someone he trusted like a bodyguard trusts gravity. He also did something else. He went looking for Calvin. Because betrayal has a cost, and Duke didn't like being the one holding the bill. Calvin was missing. No calls, no sightings, no reliable word, just rumors. Calvin fled out of state. Calvin got scared and hid. Calvin got caught by the people he stole from. And in Duke's mind, one rumor started to taste more believable than the others. Calvin got caught by the Williams. That possibility made Duke's skin prickle. Because if Calvin was in the Williams' hands, it meant betrayal had turned inward. It meant the Williams weren't begging for peace. They were preparing consequences. Duke decided to strike first, not with a gun, with leverage. He sent 2 men to watch the Williams house, not to attack, to intimidate, to remind them the world was still watching, to trigger fear. Fear makes people make mistakes, and mistakes, in Duke's world, were openings. On a Thursday evening, just as the sun dropped and the streetlights buzzed alive, Denise stepped onto her porch with a basket of laundry. She stopped. Across the street, a car idled. Inside, 2 silhouettes. One lifted a hand, not waving, not friendly, just acknowledging. Denise stared. Her face didn't change much, but inside her chest, something tightened. She set the laundry basket down slowly and walked back inside. Leon looked up. "What is it?" Denise didn't answer right away. She went to the kitchen drawer, opened it, and took out the spare house key, the plain brass key, the one Marcus had been holding in the opening image, warmed by palm. She placed it on the table. Leon stared. "Why you put that there?" Denise's voice was quiet. "So we remember," she said. "This is still ours." Marcus came in a minute later, saw the key, and understood the message. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about keeping the idea of home alive in a city that tried to steal it. Ray leaned against the wall, eyes dark. "They watching?" he said. Marcus nodded. "Let them." Ray's jaw tightened. "You want them to watch?" Marcus looked at his brother. "I want them to believe we don't scare," he said. "I want them to get confident." Ray exhaled hard through his nose, like a bull forced to stand still. Denise put her hand on Ray's arm, firm. "Not reckless," she said. "Not in our name." Ray didn't reply, but he didn't pull away either. That was the family's strength. Even in fury, they stayed connected. Even in danger, they stayed together. And because they stayed together, they didn't break the way Duke expected. They didn't run. They didn't call for mercy. They didn't lash out blindly. They tightened their circle and kept moving forward. That night, Marcus made the next move. He didn't go for Duke directly, not yet. He went for one of Duke's men, the watcher who thought his job was to intimidate. Marcus decided to show him something worse than intimidation. Consequences. The watcher didn't vanish in a dramatic scene. He simply didn't show up to watch the Williams house the next night. And when Duke asked why, no one had an answer. Because the man wasn't responding to calls, wasn't answering his door, wasn't at his girlfriend's place. He was simply absent. And absence, to men like Duke, is a message written in a language that doesn't need translation. 2. 9 became 7. The city started whispering louder. Leon's line. Leon Williams had lived long enough to know the difference between pride and purpose. Pride is what makes men escalate for ego. Purpose is what makes men stay disciplined, even when their blood is hot. Leon didn't want his sons to become something they couldn't return from. But Leon also understood another truth. In Detroit, you don't always get to choose your battles. Sometimes battles choose you. Sometimes a betrayal chooses you. And when it does, you either bend or you break. Leon wasn't a philosopher. He was a father. He wanted his family alive. He wanted Denise safe. He wanted his sons to still be themselves when the danger passed. But as the days moved, he watched the city lean closer. He watched unfamiliar cars slow near their street. He watched neighbors stop talking when Marcus walked by, not out of dislike, but out of fear. He watched Ray's eyes grow sharper, angrier. And one night, after Marcus came home late with the kind of silence that tasted like tension, Leon sat him down at the kitchen table, just father and son. Denise upstairs, folding clothes to keep her hands busy. Ray somewhere outside, walking off heat like steam. Leon put the key on the table between them. "You know what this is?" Leon asked. Marcus nodded. "House key." Leon stared at him. "It's more than that," he said. Marcus waited. Leon tapped the key gently with his finger. "This," he said, "is what you're protecting. Not your pride, not your name, not how you look on the street." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I know." Leon's voice stayed even. "Then don't turn into a man who forgets what home feels like," he said. Marcus swallowed. "They ain't gonna let us be," he said. Leon nodded once. "Then end it," he said. "But end it clean." Marcus looked up. "Clean?" Leon's eyes didn't flinch. "No extra," he said. "No showing off. No cruelty, just the end." Marcus held his father's gaze. Then he nodded. Leon leaned back slightly, as if the weight of saying those words had settled in his chest. Outside, the city kept humming. Inside, the Williams family kept measuring its steps, and somewhere in Detroit, Duke realized he was losing control of the board. So he escalated, not in secret, in public. He sent a message through the street, not directly to the Williams, but to anyone who would repeat it. "Tell Marcus Williams we can talk. Tell him to come alone. Tell him to bring what Calvin stole. Tell him if he doesn't, something happens." That's how men like Duke negotiate, not with compromise, with threats. Marcus heard the message by afternoon. Ray heard it and wanted to go right then, right now, just to see Duke's face. Denise said no. Leon said no. Marcus said, "We go," but his tone didn't mean surrender. It meant choice. They didn't go alone. They didn't go loud. They went smart. Because there is a difference between walking into a trap and walking into a space you've already mapped. They chose the meeting place, not Duke. A neutral bar that smelled like beer and old wood, where the neon signs buzzed and the jukebox played songs nobody listened to. Marcus arrived first and sat where he could see the door, the bar mirror reflecting the room behind him. His coat collar was up. His hands were empty. His face was calm. Ray didn't enter. He watched from outside, across the street, in a parked car, eyes locked on the bar windows. Leon waited a block away, not because he wanted violence, but because he understood families don't leave one of their own exposed. Denise stayed home, but she wasn't idle. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the street, key on the table, heart steady like a drum. Duke arrived 10 minutes late. He walked in with 2 men, shoulders wide, eyes scanning, trying to look like the room belonged to him. Marcus didn't stand. He didn't smile. Duke slid into the booth across from him and leaned forward. "You got something that belongs to me?" Duke said. Marcus's eyes didn't change. "You got something that belongs to us," Marcus said. Duke's smile was thin. "Don't play," he said. "You know Calvin." Marcus nodded once. "I know him," he said. "I also know he used my house like a storage unit." Duke's eyes flicked. "So you got it." Marcus didn't answer directly. "Why you come at my door?" Marcus asked. "Why you send men to watch my mother?" Duke's jaw tightened. "Business," he said. Marcus's voice went quieter. "My mother ain't business." For a moment, the booth held a tension so sharp it felt like it could cut glass. Duke leaned back slightly. "So what you want?" he asked. Marcus looked at him like the answer was obvious. "I want the truth," he said. "And I want my family left alone." Duke laughed softly, like Marcus had told a joke. "Ain't nobody left alone," he said. "This is Detroit." Marcus nodded as if he agreed with the city, not Duke. "Then you should have thought about that," he said, "before you let Calvin put his mess in my house." Duke's eyes narrowed. "You think you can scare me?" he asked. Marcus didn't say yes. He didn't have to, because Duke had already felt fear. Duke just refused to admit it out loud. Duke leaned forward again. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You bring what Calvin left, you bring it tonight, and you disappear." Marcus's voice stayed flat. "No." Duke's face tightened. "No?" he repeated. Marcus's eyes were steady. "No," he said again. "Tonight you're going to tell me who else is in this. All 9 names." Duke stared at him, then smiled slowly, like a man meeting resistance he didn't expect. "Or what?" Duke asked. Marcus leaned in slightly, close enough that Duke could see there was no thrill in Marcus's eyes, only resolve. "Or you start disappearing like the rest," Marcus said. Duke's smile faltered for half a beat. Then Duke stood suddenly, pushing the table. "You don't threaten me," he said, voice low, deadly. One of Duke's men shifted. Outside, Ray's body went rigid, hand tightening on the steering wheel. Marcus didn't move. He just looked at Duke and said something almost gentle. "I'm not threatening," Marcus said. "I'm informing." Duke stared at him. Then, instead of exploding, Duke did something that proved Marcus was right about one thing. Duke decided to retreat. Not because he was weak, because he was calculating. He backed away from the booth, eyes hard. "This ain't over," he said. Marcus didn't answer. He watched Duke and his men leave. He watched them cross the street. He watched Duke glance toward Ray's parked car without fully turning his head. Duke had noticed. Duke understood he was being watched, too, and as Duke's car disappeared down the road, Marcus realized they had reached the story's pivot, the moment where negotiation ends. And endings begin, because Duke wouldn't let this stay quiet anymore. He would try to hit the Williams where it hurt, which meant the Williams had to end Duke before Duke could end them. 3. 9 became 6. And the city's whisper became a pulse. The weekend, the city tightened. Duke moved fast after that. He didn't wait to plan something clever. Fear makes men impatient. He ordered a hit on the Williams house, not to kill everyone, to send a message, a shot through a window, a scare, a reminder that the street could still reach inside their home. It happened late Saturday. Denise was in the living room, folding clothes. Leon was in the kitchen, cleaning a pot, not because it needed cleaning, but because his hands needed something to do. The TV was on low, normal life attempting to pretend. Then a sound like a crack of wood in cold weather. A sudden sharpness. Glass shattered. Denise froze. Leon's body moved before his mind caught up, stepping between Denise and the window, instinct older than thought. The room filled with tiny glittering shards on the floor. A picture frame on the wall tipped and fell. Silence followed. Then a car engine revved outside and sped off. Denise didn't scream. She stood very still, breath shallow, and looked at Leon. Leon's face was blank with contained fury. Ray arrived within minutes, eyes blazing, ready to run into the street. Marcus arrived right behind him, calm but dangerous. He looked at the shattered window, then looked at his mother. Denise's voice was quiet. "They crossed it," she said. Marcus nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "They did." Leon bent and picked up the house key from the table, held it in his palm, then set it down again gently, like an oath. Ray's voice shook with rage. "I'm done," he said. "I'm done waiting." Marcus looked at him. "Then don't rush," he said. "We end it tonight." Ray stared. "Tonight?" Marcus nodded. "Tonight," he repeated. Not because he wanted blood, because he understood now there was no time left for patience. If Duke was willing to shoot at a house, he was willing to do worse. The Williams couldn't let the next message land. So Marcus used the city's own wiring. He found where Duke would be, not at a home. Men like Duke don't sleep in one place when pressure rises. Not at a bar. Too public now. Not in the open. Duke would be somewhere he considered protected. A garage, a backroom place where loyal men gathered, where cars were repaired and meetings happened under the cover of grease and engines. Marcus found the garage through one of Calvin's older connections, someone who wanted out of Duke's orbit badly enough to trade a piece of information for the chance to breathe. The Williams didn't storm the garage. They didn't bring a parade. They didn't bring anything theatrical. They approached like a closing door. Marcus and Ray moved down an alley behind the garage, footsteps quiet on broken gravel. Leon stayed farther back, watching the street end, ensuring no one surprised them from behind. The garage door was half open, light spilling out, sound of voices inside. Marcus paused. He could feel his heart in his throat, but his hands stayed steady. Ray's eyes were locked forward, ready. They didn't need to kick a door. The door was already open. They stepped to the edge, looked in. Inside, Duke stood near a workbench, talking to two men. His posture was tense. His face was drawn tight. He looked like a man trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he still controlled the world. Marcus stepped into the light. Duke's head snapped toward him, eyes widening, then narrowing. "What the—" Duke started. Marcus didn't raise his voice. "You shot my window," he said. Duke's men shifted. Ray stepped in behind Marcus, presence like heat. Duke's eyes flicked between them, then toward the garage's back door. Marcus's voice stayed calm. "9 names," he said again. "You give me the names." Duke's jaw clenched. "You got nerve," he said. Marcus nodded slightly. "You got poor judgment," Marcus replied. Duke's breath came faster. He was trapped in a space he thought was safe, facing men who didn't look like they came to talk. Duke's pride wanted to fight. His fear wanted to flee. And in that friction, he made the kind of decision that ends stories. He lunged, not at Marcus, but towards the back exit. Ray moved instantly, not with a speech, with reaction. The garage became a burst of motion, boots sliding on oil-stained concrete, a tool clattering to the floor, voices rising. Then, just as suddenly, it ended. No gore, no celebration, just a heavy silence and the sound of an engine ticking as it cooled. Marcus stood in the garage's yellow light, breathing hard, staring at the place Duke had been. Duke wasn't speaking now. He wasn't leading. He wasn't threatening. He was removed from the board. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he didn't expect. Not triumph. Relief. The kind of relief that comes with sadness attached, because relief means you've done something that can't be undone. Ray's chest heaved. His eyes were wide, like he was seeing his own hands for the first time. Leon appeared at the garage door a moment later, looked inside, and said nothing. He just nodded once. 4, 9 became 5. And the city, if it had been a living thing, would have flinched, because when a man like Duke disappears from his own protected space, people understand a new rule has been written. A rule that says, even leaders are reachable, even protected men can be erased. And once that rule exists, fear spreads like fire in dry grass. The spiral, 5 left, nowhere safe without Duke. The remaining men didn't unite. They fractured, because Duke had been the center that held them in orbit. Now the orbit broke, and everyone started falling in different directions. Some tried to run, some tried to bargain, some tried to strike back without thinking, and that chaos was exactly what Marcus predicted. The Williams didn't need to chase 5 men across the city. The 5 men exposed themselves by panicking. One, called Wrench, was a mechanic who used his shop as cover for meetings. He shut down the shop overnight and tried to leave town. But leaving town requires roads, and roads require passing through places where people watch. Wrench got stopped not by police, not by rivals, but by the city's own curiosity. A man at a gas station recognized him, saw fear on his face, and made a phone call. By morning, Wrench's shop was empty, and Wrench himself was gone from Detroit's patterns. 5 became 4. Another, called Silk, was the man who handled money. He didn't carry it openly. He moved it through envelopes, through favors, through quiet exchanges. Silk tried to buy safety. He offered cash to a cousin of Marcus's, hoping money could become protection. The cousin brought the offer to Marcus like he'd brought poison. Marcus didn't take the money, he took the information, because Silk had to reveal where he was to offer anything. That's the weakness of men who rely on money. They think value can be traded for forgiveness. Some debts can't be bought off. Silk didn't vanish dramatically. He simply stopped answering calls, stopped showing at his usual spots, stopped existing in the way the street measures existence. 4 became 3. The last 3 were the ones closest to Calvin's betrayal, the ones who knew why Calvin used the Williams house, the ones who knew what Calvin promised, the ones who knew, perhaps, where Calvin was now. And Calvin was still the center of everything, because betrayal without the betrayer is a wound that won't close. Marcus needed Calvin not just for revenge, for closure, for answers. For the final tightening of the story's loop, Ray wanted Calvin for simpler reasons, because Ray had been a teenager once, watching his mother lock a door twice. Because Ray had learned early that men who betray families often think families are weak. Because Ray wanted Calvin to understand his mistake before the city swallowed him. Leon wanted Calvin for one reason: to stop the danger. Denise wanted Calvin for a reason she didn't say out loud, because she had loved him like a nephew. And betrayal from someone you fed hurts in a place that anger can't reach. So the Williams hunted the last 3 with a different intensity, not colder, more focused, because now it wasn't about threats, it was about the truth. Marcus found the first of the last 3 through a detail that seemed too small to matter: a church parking lot. Men like Duke's crew didn't go to church for faith, they went for cover, because nobody suspects a man who sits quietly in a pew. Marcus waited outside the church on Sunday, sitting in his car, watching faces come and go. He saw old women with hats. He saw families with kids. He saw men pretending to be pious. Then he saw the face he was waiting for. A man called Nate, a friend of Calvin's, someone Calvin trusted enough to involve in the setup. Nate walked out with his head down, shoulders tight, as if the sermon hadn't touched him. Marcus followed in silence. Not close enough to spook him, just close enough to keep him in sight. Nate drove to a small apartment building and went inside. Marcus didn't rush. He waited. Because men like Nate eventually have to step back out. And when Nate did, late afternoon, Marcus was there, not blocking him, not shouting, just present. Nate froze. Marcus said, "Where's Calvin?" Nate's mouth opened, then closed. He tried to laugh. "Man, I ain't—" Marcus stepped closer. "You are," he said. You are exactly that. Nate's eyes darted. Marcus's voice lowered. I'm not asking twice, he said. Nate swallowed, hands trembling slightly. He said, He ain't in Detroit. Marcus stared. Where is he? Nate shook his head fast. I don't know, I swear. Marcus watched him carefully, not for innocence, for truth. Nate's fear felt real, but fear can be real even when you're lying. Marcus said, Who does know? Nate's voice cracked. Reggie, he said. Reggie would know. Marcus nodded once. Then he let Nate walk away. Nate didn't run. He walked fast, shoulders hunched, as if he could shrink into the sidewalk. He didn't make it far in the long term, not because Marcus chased him, because once you give up a name like Reggie, you have made yourself disposable to both sides. Detroit has a way of disposing of men who become liabilities. 3 became 2. Now the final 2 were Reggie and Calvin. Reggie was harder. Reggie wasn't a flashy street figure. He was a behind-the-scenes man. Phones, addresses, introductions. The kind of man who could connect Calvin to dangerous people and then act like he'd done nothing. Marcus found Reggie where men like Reggie always end up when things collapse, at the edge of someone else's protection. Reggie was staying with a woman who had a brother with a reputation. A don't bother us kind of reputation. Reggie assumed that reputation would shield him. He assumed wrong, because the Williams weren't coming to start a war with the whole city. They were coming to close one story, and stories don't always respect reputations. Marcus approached the building in daylight. Not sneaking, not hiding. Boldness can be its own disguise. Leon was nearby, watching. Ray was across the street, in a car, eyes steady, calmer now. Not because his anger was gone, but because it had become controlled. Marcus knocked. A man opened the door halfway, big, suspicious, eyes hard. Yeah? The man said. Marcus's voice was calm. I'm here for Reggie, he said. The man laughed once. You lost. Marcus didn't flinch. No, he said. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. The man stared, trying to decide if this was courage or stupidity. Then, from inside, a woman's voice snapped. Who is it? Reggie's voice followed, shaky. Tell him I'm not here. Marcus heard it and smiled slightly, not amused, just satisfied. Because denial is confirmation. Marcus leaned closer to the door and said, loud enough for Reggie to hear, You can come out now, he said, or you can come out later. The man at the door hesitated. He didn't want trouble on his doorstep. He also didn't want to look weak. That's the street's trap, pride forcing you to host violence. Leon stepped closer from down the hallway, not threatening, just present. The man's eyes flicked to Leon, then back to Marcus. Marcus said, This ain't your fight, he said. Don't make it your fight. A long pause. Then the man opened the door wider, just enough. Reggie stood behind him, face pale. Marcus looked at Reggie like a judge looking at evidence. Where is Calvin? Marcus asked. Reggie swallowed hard. I don't know, he said quickly. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Yes, you do. Reggie's hands shook. He glanced at the man by the door, hoping protection could become a shield. Marcus said, He used my mother's house, he said. He brought danger to my family. You helped. Reggie's eyes filled with something that might have been guilt, or might have been fear pretending to be guilt. He whispered, He was supposed to pay it back. Marcus's face stayed still. Pay what back? He asked. Reggie's lips trembled. He hesitated. Ray's voice came from behind Marcus, low, almost quiet enough to miss. Say it, Ray said. Reggie flinched, and then he talked. Not in a clean confession, in fragments, in panicked pieces. Calvin had borrowed from men he couldn't repay. Calvin had promised he had leverage. Calvin had said he could stash things somewhere safe. Calvin had said the Williams were reliable, respected, good cover. Reggie said the words that made Leon's stomach twist. "He thought y'all was too decent to call anybody," Reggie whispered. Too decent. The betrayal wasn't just Cal using their house. It was Cal using their decency as a weapon. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Where is he?" he asked again. Reggie's voice broke. "He went up north," he said. "Near Saginaw. He got family out there." Marcus held his gaze. "Address?" he said. Reggie shook his head. "I don't know the address, I swear." Marcus stared at him. Then he asked the question that showed he understood Reggie better than Reggie understood himself. "Who drives him?" Marcus asked. Reggie blinked. Marcus leaned in. "Calvin don't go nowhere alone when he's scared," Marcus said. "Who drives him?" Reggie's mouth opened and closed. Then he whispered, "Terry." Marcus nodded slowly. That was enough, because Terry was the 9th name. The last obstacle. Reggie's knees seemed to weaken, like he'd just given away his own survival. Marcus turned to leave. The man at the door exhaled shakily, relieved the confrontation hadn't turned his hallway into a war zone. Ray lingered for a moment, eyes on Reggie. Reggie whispered, "I'm sorry." Ray's voice was cold. "You should be." Then Ray followed Marcus out. Reggie stayed in the doorway, trembling, realizing that saying sorry doesn't rewind anything. 2 became 1. Only Calvin remained. And Calvin was up north, hiding behind family and distance, believing the city's anger couldn't travel past its limits. He underestimated the Williams, not because they were supernatural, because betrayal makes distance feel irrelevant, because betrayal follows you, because betrayal isn't tired until it's finished. The northbound drive. The drive out of Detroit felt like leaving a war zone. Even though Detroit wasn't exploding in flames, it was quieter than that. A quiet that makes you check your mirrors. Marcus drove. Ray sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the gray landscape, jaw tight. Leon sat in the back, eyes forward, hands clasped. They didn't bring Denise, not because she wanted to stay behind, because they couldn't risk her seeing what they were about to do. Denise stayed home, alone with the key on the table and the window repaired, with a temporary sheet of plastic that snapped softly in the wind. As Marcus drove north, he felt a strange weight in his chest. This wasn't the street anymore. This was beyond the neighborhood's rules. Out here, the roads stretched long, the land opened wide, and the world felt like it didn't know their story. Marcus wondered, briefly, if that meant the story could end differently. Then he remembered the shattered glass in his mother's living room. He remembered the stranger at the door. He remembered Cal's smile, and the way Cal said 2 days. The story wasn't going to end differently. It was going to end, that's all. They found Terry first. Not because Terry was important, because Terry was a trail, a man who drove for Cal. A man whose routine was built around Cal's fear. They found Terry at a gas station outside a small town, filling up a car with out-of-state plates, glancing around too often. Marcus parked across the lot and watched. Terry went inside, bought coffee, came back out, and froze when he saw Marcus walking toward him. Terry didn't know Marcus personally, but Terry knew the look of a man who has nothing left to negotiate with. Terry's throat worked. "You," Marcus said. "Where is he?" Calmly. Terry's eyes darted. Ray stepped beside Marcus, silent. Leon stayed a few paces back, watching the lot, watching other cars, making sure no one made noise. Terry swallowed hard. "I'm just—" Marcus raised his hand slightly. "You can be just whatever you want later," he said. "Right now you're just a direction." Terry's shoulders sagged. He glanced toward the car he was fueling, and Marcus followed his gaze. A duffel bag in the back seat. Not the same duffel, a different one. But the sight of it made Marcus's stomach tighten anyway. Terry whispered, "He's at his aunt's," he said. "Back road, farmhouse, white siding." Marcus held his gaze. "Show me," he said. Terry hesitated. Ray's voice was quiet. "Don't," he said, and somehow that single word carried the threat of everything Detroit had already shown. Terry nodded quickly. He got in his car. Marcus followed in his own. Leon stayed behind the wheel, eyes sharp. They drove down back roads where trees leaned over like they were listening. They passed fields and barns and quiet houses with no idea the city's violence had traveled here in the form of 3 men and a betrayal. Terry turned down a gravel driveway. At the end was a farmhouse, white siding, dark windows, a porch light on, even in daylight, like someone was trying to keep the dark away. Terry pulled up and stopped. He didn't get out. He didn't want to. Marcus parked behind him. Ray's hand tightened on his thigh. Leon exhaled slowly. Marcus stepped out first, boots crunching gravel, and stared at the house. This was where Calvin was hiding. Not in a fortress, in a relative's home, a place that should have been safe. Betrayal always returns to the idea of home, doesn't it? Because home is what it damages most. Marcus walked up the driveway slowly. Ray followed, half a step behind. Leon stayed near the cars, watching Terry, watching the road. Marcus reached the porch. He didn't kick the door. He didn't pound it. He knocked. Polite, controlled. The door opened a crack. An older woman appeared, face wary. "Yes?" Marcus's voice was calm. "I'm looking for Calvin Booker," he said. The woman's eyes hardened. "Calvin ain't here." Ray's jaw tightened. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Ma'am," gently, "we already know he's here." The woman's lips tightened. "You need to leave." Marcus stared at her, then looked past her into the dim hallway behind. And from deeper in the house, a sound, a chair scraping, a breath caught, a movement too fast. Marcus's voice stayed soft. "Calvin," he called. "Come out." Silence, then footsteps, hesitant, shuffling. Calvin appeared in the hallway. His face was thinner, his eyes were tired, his charm was gone. He looked like a man who had been running so long he forgot what it felt like to stand still. When he saw Marcus, he went pale. When he saw Ray, he went paler. "Marcus," Calvin said, voice cracking. "Man!" Marcus held up his hand. "Don't," he said. Calvin's mouth closed, then opened again. "I didn't mean—" Ray's voice cut in, low and trembling with rage. "You didn't mean to shoot our window?" he said. "You didn't mean to bring men to our door?" Calvin's eyes flicked to the woman at the door, as if searching for rescue. The woman snapped, "Calvin, what is this?" Calvin whispered, "Auntie." Marcus said, "He used our house," he said, voice calm but heavy. "He used my mother. He set us up." The woman's face tightened with shock, anger, shame, 3 emotions fighting for space. Calvin looked at Marcus, eyes pleading. "I was scared," he said. "I messed up." Marcus's voice was steady. "You didn't mess up," he said. "You decided." Calvin swallowed hard. "I was gonna fix it," he whispered. Ray laughed once, short, bitter. "Fix it," he repeated, as if the word tasted like poison. Marcus stepped onto the porch, closer now. "9 men," he said. 9 men got pulled into your decision." Calvin shook his head fast. "I didn't want nobody hurt." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Then why you choose our house?" he asked. Calvin's face twisted. He didn't have a good answer. "Because there is no good answer to betraying a family that fed you." Calvin's voice dropped. "Because you were safe," he said. "Because you were decent." There it was again. Decent. Decency used like a handle. Marcus stared at him, feeling something inside him shift. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a deep, cold clarity. Calvin had seen decency as weakness. Calvin had gambled their safety on the assumption they would be too honorable to fight back. And now Calvin stood in a farmhouse hallway, realizing honor can have teeth. Leon stepped onto the porch, voice low. "This ends," he said. The woman at the door looked at Leon, then at Marcus, then at Ray. "You can't," she began. Marcus didn't look at her with hatred. He looked at her with exhaustion. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "your nephew already did what can't be undone." Calvin's eyes filled with tears. "Please," he whispered. Ray's hands shook. Not because he was afraid, because he was holding back a flood. Marcus held Calvin's gaze for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "You're coming with us." Calvin blinked. "What?" Marcus's voice didn't change. "You heard me." Calvin looked at the woman again. She looked back, helpless. Because in the end, family can't always protect you from the consequences of your own choices. Calvin stepped forward slowly, like a man walking toward a sentence. Ray followed close, eyes burning. Leon stayed behind them, steady. They walked Calvin down the porch steps and toward the cars. The gravel crunched under their feet like a countdown. Terry watched from his car, eyes wide, terrified, wishing he could evaporate. They didn't touch Calvin roughly. They didn't need to. Calvin was already collapsing under the weight of what he'd done. They put him in the back seat of Marcus's car. Marcus got behind the wheel. Ray sat beside him. Leon sat in the back, near Calvin, silent as gravity. They drove. Not back to Detroit. Not yet. They drove to a place outside town, an empty stretch near a river where the wind moved through reeds and made a sound like whispering. They got out. The air smelled like cold water and mud. Calvin shivered. Ray's breath came fast. Marcus looked at Calvin. And now the final question wasn't where Calvin was. It was what to do with him. Because the hunt had always been about ending the threat. But Calvin was a different kind of threat. Calvin was the betrayal itself. If they let him walk, the story could restart. If they ended him, the story would close. But the cost would live inside the Williams family forever. Leon watched his sons closely. Denise wasn't here to anchor them. So Leon became the anchor. He said, "Lo, you tell us everything." Calvin nodded quickly, desperate. I will. Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Say it," he said. "All of it." Calvin's words tumbled out. Names, connections, promises, money owed. Who came to the Williams door? Who ordered the intimidation? Calvin didn't speak like a villain. He spoke like a scared man who made selfish choices, then watched those choices grow into a monster. When Calvin finished, he stood there, trembling, breath steaming. Ray's eyes were wet, not from sympathy, from fury. Marcus stared at Calvin and felt something unexpected rise. Grief. Grief for what Cal had been. Grief for what this had become. Grief for the innocence they didn't even know they still had until it shattered. Ray spoke first, voice cracking. "You ever think about my mom?" he asked. "You ever think about her sitting in that house?" Calvin's lips trembled. Ray stepped closer. "You ever think about what you did to us?" Ray demanded. Calvin whispered, "I'm sorry." Ray laughed again, bitter. "Sorry," he repeated. Marcus raised a hand, stopping Ray's advance. Ray looked at Marcus, eyes pleading for permission to unleash. Marcus held his gaze. Then Marcus looked at Leon. Leon's face was heavy with years. Leon said quietly, "Son," he said to Marcus, Make the decision you can live with. That was the hardest instruction a father can give. Not do it, not don't, just live with it. Marcus looked at Calvin. Calvin's eyes begged. Marcus heard Denise's voice in his head. Together. He imagined Denise at the kitchen table with the key. He imagined the plastic sheet in the window snapping in the wind. He imagined the house becoming a target again if Calvin walked free. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he made his choice. Not with cruelty, not with gloating, with finality. Calvin did not return to Detroit. And by the time Marcus, Ray, and Leon drove back south with the sunrise behind them, the betrayal had been sealed shut. 9 men. 9 removed from the story's surface. Not all in the same way, not all with the same shape, but all connected to one act, weaponizing the Williams family's trust. The hunt was over. The vengeance was complete. And yet, as the miles rolled under their tires, Marcus realized something that sat heavy in his chest. Completion doesn't feel like peace. It feels like emptiness where fear used to be. It feels like standing in a quiet room after a storm and realizing the walls are still wet. You can call it victory, but you still have to live in the house. Aftermath. The cost that doesn't make headlines. Detroit didn't throw a parade. The city never does. It just absorbs what happens and keeps moving. On the blocks where Duke's people used to linger, men started standing differently. Talk became quieter. Cars stopped idling in front of the Williams house. The slow-roll intimidation faded. The street recalibrated. But recalibration isn't healing. It's adjustment. The Williams returned home with the window repaired properly. Glass replaced, frame fixed. But Denise could still hear the shatter at night if the house got too quiet. Leon went back to work when work was available, shoulders a little more hunched than before. Ray tried to return to being young, but something had aged him in a single season. Marcus became even quieter, not because he was proud, because he was carrying weight. One evening, weeks later, Denise sat at the kitchen table with Marcus. The key was still there, on the table, a small object that had become a symbol. Denise touched it gently and said, "You still feel like this is home?" Marcus stared at the key. He swallowed. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said, "but it feels different." Denise nodded slowly, eyes tired. "It will," she said, "but we don't let them take it." Marcus looked up. "We?" he asked. Denise's gaze held steady. "We," she repeated. Because that was the truth the betrayal couldn't destroy. The family stayed together. The betrayal tried to turn them into strangers to each other. It didn't work. But the cost lived on. In their sleep. In their flinches. In their silences. In the way they watched cars slow on their street even months later, and in the quiet knowledge that sometimes the law isn't the only system people live under. Sometimes you live under the system the street creates when the official world fails. And that system always collects interest, even after the debt feels paid. Closing the loop. So let's go back to that man in the Oldsmobile, the engine off, the collar up, the key warm in his palm. That key was never just brass. It was the boundary between home and not safe. It was the symbol of trust, who you let inside, who you keep out. Calvin Booker crossed that boundary with a smile and a favor. He used the Williams decency like a tool. And in doing so, he taught them a brutal lesson Detroit has taught too many families. If you let betrayal sit at your table, it doesn't leave on its own. It grows. It invites strangers to your door. It shatters your windows. It turns your kindness into leverage. The Williams family decided that wouldn't happen. They decided to end the threat in the only language the threat respected. 9 men, connected by a betrayal, removed from the board. Not because the Williams were monsters, because the city had cornered them into a choice. And choices like that don't come with clean hands. They come with consequences. So here's what I want to ask you. Because this is where stories like this stop being history and start being a mirror. If you lived in a place where the system moved slow, where protection came late, where your home could become a target because someone you trusted got desperate, what would you do? Would you put faith in the law, even if it meant waiting while danger circled your door? Or would you do what the Williams did? Take control, end the threat, and carry the cost forever. And one more question. The one people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Was the betrayal the moment Calvin used them? Or was it the moment the world taught them decency could be exploited?